Hi, this tutorial covers outliers and influential points. Okay, so let's start with the definition of an outlier. Okay, and this is an outlier for bivariate data. So it's a little different than the outliers that we've talked about for univariate data. Yeah, pretty similar though still. So an outlier is a point in a scatter plot that has an extreme x value, an extreme y value, or both. And then a point can also be an outlier if it's well away from the main trend of the points. Okay, so there's kind of four different ways. You can either have an extreme x, an extreme y, or both. And then also, it's possible that it's not an extreme value, but if it's so far away from the rest of the points, or the main trend of the points, um, we can still consider it an outlier. Okay, so what we're going to look at is I basically have the same graph here reproduced 3 times. So what this is measuring is the number of boat registrations. And this is measured in 10,000s. And then the number of manatee fatalities. And each of these points represents a different year. Okay, so in Florida, they used to have a lot of issues with manatee deaths from power boats. So we can see that seems to be a positive association between how many boat registrations there are, so probably how many boats are in the water, and then how many manatee fatalities they recorded that year. But let's look at some different possible outliers. Okay, so we said that an outlier can have an extreme x value. Okay, so an extreme x value would mean that it's far away. So let's make one with an extreme x value, but not an extreme y value. Okay, so this outlier would have an extreme x value, but not an extreme y value. Okay, so you'd be in the, a lot, way more boat registrations than normal. But the y value, right around 30, would be a pretty typical number of fatalities in a year. Okay, so what we'd say for this one is this is an outlier because it has an extreme x. Sorry, extreme x value. Okay. Now, if we look for something that has an extreme y value, but not an extreme x value, then you're going to maybe look at a point up here. Okay, so if we have an extreme number of manatee fatalities, but not an extreme number of registrations, this also is an outlier, but it's for a different reason. So this is outlier extreme y. Okay, now if you're looking for one that has both an extreme x and an extreme y, that's going to be a point maybe up here. Okay, so again, this will also be an outlier. So now if there were a high number of manatee fatalities and a high number of boat registrations, this is an outlier because of extreme x and y. Okay, now the third kind of type of outlier that you'll see is if it's neither an extreme, it's not an extreme value, but it's just way outside of the trend. So we'll just take a look at another example here. So let's say that your cluster of points, or your kind of scatter plot, looks something like this. Okay, high number of points, kind of in that parabolic shape, and you have a point right there. Okay, well outside that trend of data. So even though this is an extreme value, okay, the x value is pretty typical, the y value is pretty typical, this will still be an outlier. And it's an outlier because it's outside of the trend of the data. Okay, so just kind of 4 different ways you'll see outliers when looking at bivariate data. Okay, now let's also take a look at an influential point. So an influential point is an observation that, if removed, significantly changes a statistical measure, like R, your correlation coefficient. Okay, so if we look at some influential points. So actually, let's start with one that's not influential. So let's start with this point here. Okay, this point is certainly an outlier. It has an extreme x and y, but it's not influential because that point is right in line with the trend of the other values. Okay, so this point is an outlier, but not influential. Okay, now if we look at another point here, maybe this point here, that point is influential because that point is going to shift. Like if we were to fit a line on there, if we were to calculate R, this is going to make this a more positive association with that point included. Okay, and this point is actually probably not an outlier. It's not that far away from the rest of the data, but it will affect that value of R. So what we'll say here is that this is influential, but not an outlier. Okay. Now, if we look at one that's both influential and an outlier, we can maybe look at a point maybe similar to this one out here. Okay, this point is influential because it's going to shift the trend down this way, so it's going to make it a less positive correlation coefficient. And this is also an outlier because it has an extreme x value. So this is outlier and influential. Okay, so just kind of a relationship between looking at both influential points and outliers. All right, so that's been the tutorial on influential points and outliers. Thanks for watching.